this evening to go over the 23-24 Cross Insurance Arena budget. We have that up at the screen. Everyone can see that? Okay, or do I have to blow it up a little bit? I can do whatever. Anyways, the trustees reviewed this budget back in April, had a pretty lengthy conversation on it, and what typically doesn't happen is approval in the same day. The trustees usually kick the budget down to their next meeting in June and then approve it then. However, they felt this was a well-put-together budget, very responsible projections moving forward for the upcoming budget year, and they put a strong recommendation to approve this budget to the county commissioners. And so that set the stage for this evening's presentation and workshop format for the commissioners to see the Cross Insurance Arena budget. And Mike, it's all yours to take us through this.
Thank you. Before we go into the next year, what I did was take a really hard look and deep dive into what the previous year looked like for us, where those categories or line items were that we could try to generate a little bit more revenue. And looking at it through the event mix wise, the previous year going at it, there was like, we were able to bring in, like, say, The Price is Right Live, which was directly responsible. The part that was the catalyst for it was putting the curtain system up that was approved a year ago. We were able to get that show because of the half-house curtain, makes a more intimate setting, and that show sold out. So, we're looking at a show like that. When I booked it, I was like, I hope it does well, and it did. But that's where we started to diversify our portfolio a little bit on the kind of shows we were looking to bring in. So not only newer shows with, again, more diversity, but also how do we make existing shows create more revenue. For instance, Globetrotters, we put together some special packages. We sold almost 60% more tickets. Same with ice racing, we sold about 30% more tickets because we did a winter fest. So folks would come and see different motorized vehicles that were in the lobbies and outside. So we just made it more fun for the folks coming to the events. So looking at that over my first year as GM, I saw some real good opportunities to try to bring in other successful shows that have never come through our building, and to give them a shot for at least, it would be a one-off, but with the hope of generating recurring expos or trade shows or concerts for each subsequent year. We just had our first Comic-Con. We've ever had one at the building, and it was an incredible success. We're already booked for next year again, so like that was my goal, is to bring something in that's new, fill up the booking calendar a little bit more, and have it be a recurring event that we can hopefully, mark the calendars on for many years to come. Going into this next fiscal year, we took a lot of that information, a bunch of new promoters we're working with. We have new production equipment that we're working with, and I was able to look at the mix of shows that we're coming into. And every year we do about 100 shows, 100 events over a fiscal year. And, can we do 120 or 130 shows? We talked about that. We could, but we only have a staff of right now 13 people. And the 100 shows as of right now, we're all a little bit crispy from the last 2 months. So I have to be able to be cognizant of like staff burnout, but also to make sure that we're hitting the budget and the mark for the building and for the county. So this slide that's on the screen right there is the budget presentation that I went over for the trustees on April 5th. And like I said, I was talking about 100 shows. I mean, my goal was to book more. But not just book anything, to have days where, because we can easily lose money on a show if I bring something in that doesn't perform as we were hoping it would. So it's not just a matter of making, more days have events on them, but it's also making sure that they're profitable and that I'm taking good care of the budget. So if you look at the bottom line on this screen, it shows where we're at for the, what was approved last year was the $512,000 loss, operating loss for the year. That was approved again a year ago. And right now we're projecting to end up at about a $314,000 loss. So we were fortunate to have a swing in our favor of about $213,000. And we were doing that, basically, we were being very realistic with what we were projecting last year. And we're doing the same thing for next year. So what was approved this time around was about a $300,000 loss. And again, we were 500 the year before. And I feel very strongly that that's a good barometer, that if it's just a typical year with, 36 hockey games and the normal number of shows, we would end up at about that number. And as I told the trustees that day, my goal was not to end up in the red. I want to end up in the black. I mean, we did that one time in the last 15 years, and it was euphoric. It was a great year for us. But we can do that by going to 105, 109 shows. We can do that by having extra days. I'm going to use the Comic-Con as another example. Instead of them just coming in on a Saturday, they have shows Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon. So it's 3 days worth of events that normally for one day just would have been obviously a single day. So that created 3 days worth of revenue that worked out in our favor. Thank goodness for that particular event run. And that's where, going to this bottom line, again, that got approved of the $300,000 loss for this next budget year, is how do we tackle that to make sure that, we don't do any worse than that, but how do we beat it so that we try to get as close to a zero break even as we possibly can. And we can do that with an aggressive marketing mix and one that I feel confident that we can land. So if we can go to the next slide, Jim, please. So what that is basically is what the next year looks like at the arena. What we're able to do is kind of bring back some of the old favorites. We haven't had a Maine Mariners game in a while, a couple of years, 3 years, whatever it's been. We have them coming back this next fiscal year. And I'm like, what can we do more than just have that one game? Well, we're going to have the women's team play in the afternoon, separate ticketed event, and then we're going to have the men play that evening.
Talking UMaine game.
UMaine hockey.
UMaine, sorry, yeah.
Not the Maine Mariners.
Yeah,
that's right.
You read about them?
Mariners might show up.
Yeah.
Could be that.
So for the Black Bears, thank you, Jim. We were able to get 2 events out of that, and that hasn't been announced yet, but that's coming. So
Thank you.
that's part of this mix that we put together for the next year. We have our traditional 36 hockey games for hockey, for the Mariners. Lacrosse, we gave them a test last year. It was very profitable, but they were new. They were not well organized. They're hoping to come back next year. So I believe they're going to come back. It was a great little run. We had 3 games with them, hoping that they come back. Again, college hockey, the Black Bears will be back in December. You'll be getting an announcement on that very soon. High school sports, we were able to, again, this past year, bring back MPA hockey, whereas we hadn't had MPA hockey in, I think it was 20 years. So we have our MPA basketball and now our MPA hockey, and they both went really well this past year, so that's what I booked again for next year. Disney's coming back. Trolls weren't coming back, but they did let me know that there's a chance we could get, they might swing back to the Northeast. So it was a no on Trolls a few months ago, but now it's a maybe. Racing will be back, the ice racing, Globetrotters. Monster trucks, again, looking at making a show more profitable for us. So every year prior to, we had monster trucks that performed on dirt. So to bring in, I don't know how many cubic feet worth of dirt, 33 huge dump trucks full of dirt. And it made a mess. It would end up on scoreboards, Wi-Fi devices, you find it in the hallways. So we went out and looked for a non-dirt show, and it happens to be one of the better shows out there. It's a Mattel Hot Wheels monster truck show with motorcycle jumping and all that good stuff. But there's no dirt, it's just on the concrete. And the concrete does get marked up, but they have a solution that you pour on, scrub, and then the rubber washes off the concrete floor. So that will be even more profitable for us. Number one, the ticket sales on the first 3 shows were the best we've had for any monster truck show. We just added a 4th, and that is coming up in October. And also, we do not have to spend, it's anywhere between $18,000 to $24,000 for dirt. Well, that's not going to be part of the expenses that we're going through. So that's how we're going to look at events on a go forward is how can we capitalize on them to make them more profitable and try to button up some of those expenses. Because for us at the arena, as with all the other businesses, our expenses have gone really crazy since the pandemic. I have about a 38% across the board increase on our expenses. So when I have a show trying to come to town and convince them they're gonna make a lot of money if they come here, get my expenses at 38% more. It's a really fine line how we get that work done and how we execute that show. So again, monster trucks, you see what we're doing with that. With our major and minor concerts, one of our biggest gets last year was rekindling a relationship with another local promoter at the State Theater. They had not been in the arena in 8+ years. We negotiated a deal, a strategic partnership to bring in a show to the arena this last time through, and we had Trey, Anastasio, and Goose, which was a huge show for us, one of our best per caps and profits for any concert we've ever had. So we already have 2 more shows with the State Theater on sale right now, and we're working on 3 additional ones over the next 12 to 16 months. So that relationship is at the moment, flourishing and going really well. So I'm going to try to keep the State Theater happy and to continue to grow with us. We have a show in September with them. It's already sold out, which is just an awesome thing to be able to say, because very rarely we get sellouts in April these days. So with the minor and majors, I have calculated those to increase overall our event income that we're thinking of generating was for this past year 1.4 million, and I'm projecting we're going to get to 1.8. So we're going to do that by working on these kind of shows and adding the things that we've been successful with this past year. Comedy shows, we've been doing a great job with those. We just had Kevin Hart, he sold out one of the 2 shows that he played. We have Bill Burr coming up in September. The first night sold out, the second one's almost sold out. So comedy is still popular and important to me. I'm looking at potentially bringing in some Broadway shows. That's a real,
No, he's just.
potentially get some Broadway shows. Not sure about that yet. We have to make sure the metrics work for us, where it would be profitable for the arena and the promoter to make some money too. Trade shows, we've been kicking butt on those. We've got some church stuff coming back this year that we haven't had in 4 or 5 years. And we're looking at another consumer trade show similar to the real estate convention that we had in Beretta this last January. And we made the most on that real estate conference than any trade show we've ever done at the arena before. We cleared about $42,000 on that, which was a nice gift for us. So basically, in a nutshell, looking at the revenue generating model of our budget, our event mix going into this next year, we are set up, I feel, favorably to have an excellent year going into this next year, just based on what we have booked already. So that's the first half of the budget year of next year, and I'm hoping that I can continue that through that second half of the budget year, so that we do hit all our marks and hopefully exceed anything that we're projecting for our budget bottom line. So I know it's a lot of information, a lot of shows, a lot of stats, all that, but what questions do you guys have or comments do you have about the arena that I can help with?
Questions, commissioners? Go ahead, Jim.
I don't have a question, I just, I'm glad this is being taped if it is, but at least 3 members of the board here were on the renovation end of things in years past, and we've faced a few,
Yeah.
I think they're called doubting Thomases and Thomasinas, and fortunately the voters supported it, every town did, and this really is especially coming out of a pandemic, this is a pretty remarkable comeback. Good for you.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing it.
Working hard as a team over there.
Just to emphasize that, Mike, you and your staff doing a great job. Are you having any difficulty keeping people?
Yeah, I mean, it's the recruitment, the hiring, and then the retention part.
Yeah.
And we have had some luck hiring, but then, for instance, I had a young event manager that came aboard, and we only can budget so much money for him. We can't pay him more than the general manager's making, right?
Right.
So he ended up leaving for a bigger paying job in Dallas, where it was a stadium that could pay him the kind of money he was looking for. So the retention part is starting to be a little bit of a challenge as well. So the recruitment, the hiring, and then the retention is still pretty challenging post-pandemic.
I'm sure.
I'm having a little flashback to my undergrad, my sport management degree, where we talked about event management a lot and different venues, internships also, with some of the leading schools with sport management. But I just want to say I'm really impressed with your approach at trying to change a little bit of your mix, your event mix, and I'm sure it's very difficult to figure out, what's really going to happen, especially with a new event. Is it going to play well in the city, and for those coming into the city to enjoy that show? So I think it's exciting to see what you have going, and I'm excited to be part of it and watch the process.
Yes, Alex.
One question for you, that one of the numbers that really jumps off to me is that the concession per caps. And we know that that was sort of one of the big surprises post-COVID, how that really just went through the roof. I'm seeing you're bringing it back down to normal. Are you seeing some signs that people are starting to get back to some more normal spending patterns, or is it still going?
Just being conservative, because it's been so good, I don't see that continuing to increase. It either has to
Yeah.
plateau or come back down to normal a little bit, because everyone's spending so much post-pandemic.
Yep.
Maybe their spending habits are going to get more in line with where they were now that this novelty is wearing off and everybody's come back out and enjoyed some shows. Now it's kind of back to the way it was.
Sure.
So I just was projecting a little bit conservative on that. So it's a great question. I don't want to put it in black and white that we're going to continue to go like this.
No.
And I hope we do, but I don't know realistically that's going to happen.
No, I definitely think you'd need to give it another year before you could call that something that's sticking around. It definitely jumps out.
That's a great question.
Go ahead, Steve.
Mike, just curious, you've got hockey here and you've got the University of Maine. What about college basketball? I mean, you got a lot of people that really like basketball here, and you've got a lot of alumni around that team came in that they were part of. I think they participate.
Yeah, that's another great point. We did reach out to the University of Maine, hoping to get a UMaine basketball game at an alternate site, meaning us, next year. It's not a done deal by any stretch, but I agree, we should have a little bit more college ball on there. The only thing working against us is it's during the hockey season, whereas for schools to come play here, we have to, take the glass out, put the ice deck down, build the basketball floor on top of that, and there's a cost to establish a basketball court, to set it up, and then to strike it.
Right.
Because then you gotta take the floor off, ice deck off, and then put the boards back together, and then the glass. It's expensive. So that's a deterrent sometimes when I'm putting an estimate together to try to get some, AEC or NCAA schools to come down here. But they're willing to do it if I'm able to, say, potentially profit share with them. Maybe a different deal structure as opposed to just like a traditional, you pay us for rent, we keep our expense as well. Maybe there's a way, because of how expensive it is, for us to share in maybe some of the profits that are generated through concessions, merchandise, ticketing fees. So there's different ways to skin that cat that I'm looking at. But I agree, it would be nice to have some college ball going in there, because we haven't had in a long time.
Yes, Jim.
Well, I was just going to, talk a little bit more about what Mike said at the beginning of his budget presentation. Putting a budget like this together is apples and oranges to how government puts their budgets together. I mean, you look at this, you go, what is going on here? And so I just wanted to reference that, even though there's some red and there's parentheses up there, this is a snapshot in time, really. Mike put this budget together back in March, kind of crystal balling it on what July 1st to June 30th was going to look like. And I think it's a very responsible budget. And, my favorite story that I tell about this type of budgeting is the Finance Committee 2 years ago had major heartburn over the cross-insurance arena budget. Melanie was here at the time, it was gonna lose $900,000 in 1 year. They were up in arms, let's sell this place, blah, blah, blah. a year later, and we said, well, just give us time, just give us time. And we updated the Finance Committee along the way, and Alex and I actually met with them in June of that year, just to have like a halftime year-end jail, year-end cross-insurance arena update. And at that time, we delivered, well, the cross-insurance arena made $36,000. So it was like, all right, that 900,000 that they were spinning nails at back in October turned into a positive of $36,000. So that's how fast the arena can turn things around. And Mike's not done. You saw a number of events that he's already booked. He's going to continue to book for the next 6 or 7 months for next year. He signed Kevin Hart 8 months before not 8 months, 8 weeks before Kevin Hart played here. So it can be that quick of a turnaround.
You got a call from the promoter saying they're gonna be in the area, they'll be Providence, they're gonna go up, up north to Nova Scotia. Can we stop in Portland? Yes, you sure can, let's make it work.
Yeah. So, it's a very fluid process, and it's, as a person that's on the outside seeing Mike scramble to try to sign and sign and sign, it's pretty exciting also when he does lock down these groups. So I'm just, my point is that, this is a budget that is not like a typical government budget, and it will continue to be moving as the months go on here. And I think we all know Mike, he's a go-getter, and he's gonna represent us in the best way possible and bring as many acts in as possible, so.
I think the word responsible is the best part of it, because I can project, we're gonna make $1 million next year, and then I'm gonna fall short, and that you just wouldn't be fair. So I gotta be responsible, just like what could happen if everything is just status quo.
Right. So,
Keep up the great work. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And we won't spend that million until next year.
Which is July 1st.
So, if it's all right with the commissioners, we'd like to line this up for the June meeting.
Yes.
For the commissioners to review again and approve that evening.
Very good.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike, for coming
Yeah,
in.
thanks a lot for hanging around.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
And our second item tonight?
A second item, it comes from the sheriff's office, and it's a conversation about what a policy and possible funding contribution from the county commissioners would be for line of death duty. Line of duty death, or line of death duty? Line of duty death, all right. Thank you. So, sheriff or lieutenant?
Do you want that microphone, or do we?
I think we're still taping.
Yeah, we are
Sheriff,
taping.
So, starting in 2017, we had a bad run of first responders getting killed in the line of duty, starting out with Corporal Eugene Cole, followed up by Captain Joel Barnes, fireman down in southern Maine, and then detective from the state police, and his name escapes me right now.
Campbell?
Yes, Detective Campbell. And then most recently, 2 years ago, I'm sorry, a Hancock County deputy that was struck while investigating a car crash up in Trenton, Maine. And I've been working since then on a policy of how we would treat the family if, God forbid, one of our corrections officers, because they can get killed in the line of duty, or law enforcement officers, how would we handle that? These events can get very expensive. I called around when doing the position paper, and each funeral was treated differently. The community rose to the rescue, if you will, of the family and donated a lot of things, and it didn't cost a lot of money. Others were picked up completely by the union, and not a lot was kicked in by the parent organization. One funeral was split between the county commissioners and the union, but then the bill came in, and it was more than both agreed on, and the union picked up the excess costs. I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Foss because he's done a lot of work on this with the staff. But this is an uncomfortable conversation, but a conversation we have to have, because God forbid if one of these happens, we don't have time to talk about it. There's certain expectations, there's certain things that, you know, are done. You have the feelings of the family. You know, we may have a funeral home that will give us a deal, but if that funeral home is not the preferred funeral home of the family, and there's no deal, then what are we going to do there? The family sometimes may have requests, and I think it's important for us to know where those parameters are, so we can somewhat meet the family's needs of despair, but also be somewhat reasonable. So I will kick it to Lieutenant Foss because he sat down with many of the employees and some of the union members and their concerns, and we likely won't arrive at something tonight, but it's something to think about because until 2017, this was Maine. The last one had been, you know, a line of duty death was probably 20 years ago. But we saw 3 years in a row, and then recently up in Hancock County, a first responder get killed, and I've been to all 4, and they can get labor intensive, they can get emotional, and they can get big real quick. And I just want to have that conversation ahead of time. So, Lieutenant Foss.
Sheriff. Good evening, Commissioners, Managers. Thanks for the opportunity to speak before you today. As the Sheriff said, we have had 4 unfortunate line-of-duty deaths in Maine. And also, as he said, I don't want to echo everything he said, but now is the time to prepare just in case the unfortunate event happens, either in corrections or in patrol for Cumberland County. We can't be talking about who's paying bills when we're trying to console a family and prepare for a funeral. If you haven't been to a line-of-duty death funeral, they are an event. Mike is very familiar from his tenure at the Cross Insurance Arena. They're a big production. A lot goes into it for the family to bestow honor upon the fallen officer, and all of that comes with a price tag. So a little history lesson on how we actually got here is about a year ago, the sheriff had asked me to meet with all 3 labor unions to tackle a couple of things. But first and foremost, we wanted to talk about kind of standardizing for a purpose of consistency's sake when an employee leaves the job here in Cumberland County under the sheriff's office heading. So that would include corrections and law enforcement. And what that looked like is I reached out to the labor unions for all 3 unions and said, hey, we need your help. This is very important to us that regardless of whether you've been here for 4 months or 40 years, we need to standardize, be fair, and be consistent in how and when our employees leave. Now, obviously, we created, with the help of the union, all 3 of them, a graduated system that says if you were here for 4 months, you would be recognized by A and B. If you've been here for 40 years, you would be rewarded for your tenure A, B, C, and D. And we outlined what those A, B, and C, and D were. Well, one of the final proposals that he gave to me to solve was, hey, we've talked about everything, and this is great, about fairly and consistently recognizing our staff, because nobody should ever leave employment upset and disappointed that they didn't get recognized. So their proposal to me was, what are we going to do if one of our officers is killed in the line of duty? And their question was, who's going to foot the bill? Because we know from the 4 that we've attended and seen in the last 5 years, that there's probably a pretty big price tag. And the sheriff reached out and got pretty scared with some price tags on there to the tune of 20 to roughly 35,000, I think is what I heard from one of them. So we all agreed at the table that, geez, it probably wouldn't be very fair to extend that cost to the fallen officer's family. So what are we going to do? So I had talked to the sheriff about that, and I know he drafted a position paper and forwarded it to your attention for your review and consideration. So in the meantime, I know the manager had some questions. He had helped me as well as Mike, and one of the big cost items that we found immediately was obviously the location for the venue. We've seen from the 4 events that have happened in Maine, they've either been at the Cross Insurance Arena or the Cross Insurance Center. Because it does draw a massive crowd from not just Maine, but New England and sometimes Canada and throughout the country. So you're looking at thousands of attendees locally and nationally and perhaps internationally that want to attend. So it is a huge production and a huge cost. So just to give you a sense of what that cost looks like from a venue standpoint is right off the bat, it's just around $17,000 to rent the facility for a day. And that doesn't include any of the funeral expenses, limousine services for the family that are customary and typical to provide for the fallen officer's family. As you guys may know, if an officer is killed in the line of duty, he or she gets their name engraved on the state memorial wall and the national memorial wall in Washington, D.C. Thank you for recognizing in the proclamation National Police Week. That is the week where all officers from the prior year, their names get engraved on the national memorial wall. So obviously we feel it's important for us that if we had a member that was killed in the line of duty, that we would want to send their spouse, children, perhaps even parents if they're still alive, for that incredible ceremony. So there's a lot of bills, and the sad thing is, because I know you'd like to have firm and hard numbers, as do I, but those numbers really vary depending on the wishes of the family, how big the family is, the time of year. We've seen obviously price points fluctuate crazy just in airfare alone. It could be $200 tomorrow and $700 the next day. So to get you a firm and hard number on what we're looking at that we feel would be reasonable for us as employers to cover an unfortunate event like that is really difficult to tell you and give you a sense of what that looks like. But we do know from our professional contacts at Cross Insurance Arena that we're looking at $17,000 for renting the venue, and then funeral costs, limousine services, a lot of the work that goes into that, the ceremonious honor guards and the ceremony of events are paid for by the agency, just payroll, overtime or straight time. So that's really not a huge cost. It's obviously a burden in terms of losing people from, losing resources from the road or from other areas, but the arena, the event location, transportation, funeral costs, and then that follow-up trip to Washington, D.C. are all, which includes obviously lodging and airfare for a 6-day event. Most of the time, the family doesn't go down for all 6 days. So we're looking at easily $25,000 to $30,000. I'm just going to throw out a rough figure, knowing what Cross Insurance Arena is. And we don't know. We're kind of playing this with you guys in terms of trying to figure out what we should do, how we should do it. We feel strongly that if we lose one of our officers or corrections officers in the line of duty, that we shouldn't put that cost on the family. We want to celebrate that individual and the service that he and she gave. And it's impossible to budget for, right? Because we can never predict when it's going to happen. Maybe it happens tonight. Maybe it happens 20 years from now. Maybe it's 100 years before Cumberland County sees another line of duty death. But we need to be ready. And we do owe that to our staff to be ready and to their family to have some answers so we're not scrambling, that night with the family asking questions about what do we do, how do we do it. And that's the purpose of the position paper the sheriff drafted. As he said, we're not looking necessarily for answers from you tonight, but we're looking certainly for your help and guidance, and hopefully financial assistance to be prepared for that day, sadly, probably when it happens.
Thank you. Questions? Sue?
What do the local departments do? You know, like Falmouth or Cumberland or Wyndham, you know, do they have this? You know, do they have something in place? If they're officers?
Yeah, they don't.
They don't either.
They don't. I don't know of anybody that does. I know the manager had asked for me to reach out to the unions, and I did, knowing that the sheriff had talked to several of the other sheriffs to find out how they paid for that bill. And I reached out to the NCEU shop steward. He reached out to National and has not gotten a result back. I did speak directly with both the corrections Teamsters representative and the law enforcement representative, Tracy St. Clair. And she was intimately involved in Luke Gross and Joe Barnes. And she said that the Teamster Union would be very involved and would provide some financial assistance, but she was very clear that they do not budget for line-of-duty deaths for their law enforcement colleagues, and that they would not budget and could not budget for it. So she had explained that they reached most of their revenue from contributions from other Teamster locals that made donations and other unions outside of the Teamsters venue that made donations. So she would not give me a hard line figure of what she paid or what the Teamsters paid for each one of those funerals. But reading between the lines, it was several $1,000s. But I don't know if it was $10,000, $5,000, or $20,000. So she assured me that she would be there with us, doing work and providing financial assistance, but she could not commit to a hard and fast line of how much they could provide. And I'm going to assume that National NCEU would probably give a very similar answer.
Jim?
A couple of things. So you walk up with a stack of papers. I don't know if that included the reading material for us to go over. I'm glad to see.
I do have some handouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be glad to have one of those.
Okay.
And you mentioned the cross-insurance arena center a couple of times at $17,000. Is that, did you have an impression that that would be a cost in addition to anything else that happened that would be incurred by the center, or that was that the rent for the center, right?
That would be what the county got billed for renting the facility.
For renting the facility from the county?
That's my understanding. We've got some really good experts in this room that might be able to clarify, but that was my
Let's hit the
understanding.
pause button on that, because it sounds worse than what it is. What it is, it's really covering the cost associated with the building. It's not rent.
No, we don't
And
charge
so,
rent.
Mike, run down the line items on what the cost would be.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at this,
Actually, I'm sure you should go ahead, but I don't question that you'd spend some money. And, yeah.
even just building a
Thank you.
stage, hanging curtain, staffing,
Yeah.
preparation,
Thank you.
ingress, egress, it's all covering costs, so the
Thanks,
rent
Tim.
isn't rent. I mean, we made
Thank you.
the decision with Captain Barnes and Detective Campbell. We're not charging rent, it's just the bills open up the place and build the infrastructure out to be able to accommodate what the families want to see when they come into the arena. And I'm sure the center did the same thing out at that.
As the commissioners know, we have an outside union that works to build the stage, to hang from the rafters and hang curtains and lights and things like that. So it's an outside entity coming in that incurs the cost for us to really build the arena out.
I have a couple of relevant experiences. When I was on the city council, Bob Gilman died as the city manager. While he wasn't at the office when that happened, but it was very shortly after the workday was over, the day before Christmas. They
Sure.
got engaged, actually. That was quite a moment. And And about 40 years ago, when my fraternity brother was picked off on Route 111, assistant motorist, as a member of the, I think, the South Railroad Police Department. So, that was a significant event statewide. And you can imagine the funeral was not that's how I'm gonna read this and try to imagine, what our role would be tomorrow related to something that never happened, and would be really the province of the commission at the time to decide what to do if it ever did happen. But I look at it and see if the makings of a policy are sitting there that we should be taking action on.
Go ahead, Steve. Have you looked into any of the other first responder professions to see what they do? Like, I know fire does this.
So the Detective Campbell, his funeral was paid for by the Maine Troopers Association, so their union, but obviously they're a pretty massive organization, and I'm sure it was a huge bill for them, but that was paid by the Troopers Association. In talking to Tracy St. Clair, who's the Teamsters business agent, she represented Berwick Fire and Captain Barnes. They were overwhelmed, naturally, like anybody would be, of course, but they had no budget for that, and her explanation was Teamsters covered most of that budget. So,
And does the state have anything that they provide?
the fallen officer's family is the recipient of a number of benevolent funds, both federally and through the state, but in terms of the agency, for purpose of paying for a funeral or any events associated with that, there is, to my knowledge, no financial line that provides and funnels any money toward that event.
The thing that going through my head, and first off, I think we need to do something. It's a good effort, but it seems like what you've discussed is very open-ended, and it's almost to the point of what wouldn't we cover if, God forbid, an officer was killed in the line of duty.
Right. I'm not a money guy, but there are a lot of money guys and girls in here that are smarter than I am with that, but perhaps.
And I'm not talking about the dollars, I'm talking about what kind of a function wouldn't you cover?
I think we would very much replicate what we've seen work in the past. We've been very involved in all 4 funerals with our honor guard and many members of that and our command staff. So we've got a rough outline on what is customary for a line of duty death celebration or memorial. So we probably wouldn't stray very far from adding extras or leaving things out. And really, honestly, it's really at the call of the family too. If they don't want a very public celebration of life or memorial service, then we wouldn't want it. But we'd be disappointed because we wouldn't have a chance to celebrate and recognize that individual's sacrifice as well. But the family's honors always come first in their wishes.
The question that I had at the very beginning, maybe I wasn't clear, what I wondered if you'd looked at the other professions like fire, they have a similar program.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we saw for Captain Barnes was very similar to what you would see for any police officer. Yeah.
I was going to add, it's things like infrastructure. You expect thousands and thousands of people, so for the Ben Campbell's funeral, Joe Barnes' funeral, they set up parking at the main mall, and they had to get buses to pick the attendees up and drop them off at the Civic Center because parking it exceeded what we had. Porta potties lined up on Spring Street so that, those who may stand outside and, if you fill the place, then, and you never know, then you gotta have some contingency plan to have screen outside and porta potties, et cetera. There's just a bunch of things that you wouldn't think of. Speaker system, I don't know if that comes with the Civic Center or not, but, you know, having somebody come in and set up a speaker system so that, you know, you can hear what's going on. That's why we wanted to talk about this, because there's no time when this happens to sit there and think and itemize, and some people will step up and donate. I've seen school buses. We had one case with Eugene Cole that one of the school buses locally here provided rides to Bangor and back. You know, it was a rough ride in a school bus, but it was a ride, and it was warm. At one of the Eugene Coles, they needed to rent tents outside, because once the funeral service is done, then there's a 21-gun salute, and that takes place outside, and there's the folding of the flag, and, you know, so if it's inclement weather, you're setting up tents outside for the family only, or if it's really hot, tents outside for the family. So it just gets one of those things, you know, if the family has a big family, I've seen them rent tour buses to get the family, you know, from a location to the funeral home, in the procession to the service, and then back. So they get big, and one thing you don't know is there's going to be a lot of people coming. You just don't know how many people are going to be, and do you have the infrastructure to support that? So.
That I can honestly say, and I don't know which one I attended, I think it was Barnes. We actually, with the VIPs, we actually did with the busing, and had to start at 5 a.m. in the morning and be down on Commercial Street, because the buses were coming, and, you know, they came, you know, continuously. Well, then it stopped, well, then it goes with the other way, as everybody's coming out, you know, and that was like a 12-hour day, you know, and that's just to get with the buses there. So, you know, like in all these other, you know, other components. And I think it's, you know, a good idea that we're going through this, because this is a time when people, they just want to spend because they're grieving, you know. And I don't think we can do the open with checkbook. So I think that we really have to have with some guidelines, you know. You know, these are what we will provide, and if the family wants all the extras and all that, you know, who provides for that? You know, do we look out into getting with donations, you know, or for stuff, or, you know, do we will contact, you know, with this one? I think I saw somewhere that with the outfit, you know, that we will buy the cruises from, I think, you know, not so much ours, but, you know, they donated, you know, with the cars and stuff of the family, or they paid for that bill. So I think, you know, there's a lot of moving parts in this, and I think it's going to take is section by section, you know, this is what's got to be done, you know, and how is this going to work, and how is this going to work. You know, then the other thing is that, you know, say that we cap it, you know, what you can get with today for that cap is probably not what you're going to get 3 to 5 to 10 years down the road. So at some point with it, you have to look, is how are we going to, you know, do the increase in this, you know, like if we were capping something. So, you know, 30,000 for a funeral is not very much.
No, this is it's a very good start, and it's a very good effort to try to formulate a policy. One of the issues we confront every day, every meeting, all of us, is what are we going to put on the responsibility in the pocketbooks of our 290,000 residents in Cumberland County? Is it their responsibility to pay for a funeral for a fallen officer, a fallen fire department person, and is it our position to commit, if we formulate a policy, vote on it, to a board, you know, 4 years down the road, 6 years down the road, 8 years down the road? A lot of speculation. So we have a lot of conversations that we need to have, I think, and a lot of issues to discuss. Not to say that we shouldn't be a partner involved in some way, but we have a financial responsibility to our $290,000 constituents, so we can't say, I don't think we can say in a vote, we are going to commit to the $17,000 fee for our arena, when our arena could be booked for something else at that time. So a lot of moving parts, like Sue said, but it's good, a good basis for conversation. Jim, do you have any comments or thoughts?
No? No, I'm good, thank you.
Well, I think it is our responsibility to a point, especially, you know, these are law enforcement or corrections officers that have given their lives to the citizens of Cumberland County, whether it's in corrections or whether it's on the road, you know. And I do think it's, you know, that it is our responsibility up to a point.
Right.
You know, but it's not the open with checkbook, you know, because, you know, I know what people, oh, yeah, and, you know, what money, yeah, we'll spend this, and the next thing you know, you're right up there. So I think, you know, that is a good conversation, you know, that we have to have, and we have to be honest with about it. And, you know, some people are gonna get upset, some people will be happy, but I think it's an exercise that we have to do. And we all have to go into it, you know, with our eyes open and, you know, go from there. So, God forbid it ever happens, so.
Thank you for your consideration.
Yes, no, it will be an ongoing issue that we'll raise and discuss and
Yeah.
report back.
We might have to have, you know, another with dialogue like this, or, you know, like after we come back or something. But, yeah, okay, well,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And that concludes our workshop.
Yep.
And it concludes our meeting.